vital that we win in this marginal constituency and in other marginal constituencies across this region, from Stevenage to Ipswich, from Watford to Waverley, right across the district. We need to make sure that we get the Conservatives out in 2015 and elect a Labour government to start to rebuild our country for the future. These are seats where we lost in 2010. They're seats where we've worked hard to show, under Ed Balls' leadership, that we've changed our party from the past and shown that we've learned lessons where we made mistakes, like on immigration and on bank regulation. But these are also seats where working people have seen their living standards fall month after month since the 2010 general election. They are crying out for change and a better deal than they're getting from this current Conservative government. So we've got to show that Labour can offer that real change. And with the general election, as Patrick said, just 9 months ahead, it's vital that we set out the choice the country will be facing in the general election next year. Over the last few days, Ed Balls and my shadow cabinet colleagues have been setting out the stark choice that Britain will face on leadership, on crime, and also on the National Health Service. And in the coming weeks, we'll be doing the same, setting out the choice on education, on jobs, on the welfare state, on housing too. But today I want to talk about the economy, about the Conservatives' record since 2010, the risks that they pose for the future, and how Labour's plan will make Britain better off and fairer for the future. Let's start with the government's record on the economy since 2010, over the last 4 years. Last Friday we learned that our economy has at long last got back to the size it was before the global financial crisis. But the fact that Conservative strategists are desperate to persuade us all that that marks a significant moment is actually rather revealing. Because it's actually happening 2 years later than the Chancellor's original plan. 3 years after America reached the same point. And because our population has been growing as well, GDP per head won't actually get back to that level for another 3 years. It will be a full lost decade of lower living standards. So while David Cameron and George Osborne complacently claim the economy is now fixed, the truth is, most people are still worse off under the Tories. Even the Business Secretary Vince Cable admitted the truth when he said at the weekend that wages have been growing more slowly than prices. As one Conservative advisor told the Sunday newspapers about his comments, "This is most unhelpful," they said. "We're trying to mark a major milestone, and he tells people living standards are falling." Of course, we shouldn't forget that Vince Cable and the Liberal Democrats have been part of a government that's failed to tackle the cost of living crisis. But despite that, Vince Cable is right. Living standards have been falling and are still under pressure. For working people, average wages after inflation are down by over £1,600 a year. Tax and benefits changes since 2010 will leave the average household £974 a year worse off by the time of the election. And new analysis today from the House of Commons library shows that under David Cameron, working people will have seen the biggest fall in wages in any parliament since 1874. This is set to be the first time since the 1920s that the average working person will be worse off at the end of the parliament than they were at the beginning. And from a Conservative-led government that came into power promising to make working people better off, that is a pretty dismal record of failure. But the failure to deliver rising living standards isn't the only promise that they broke. David Cameron and George Osborne famously said, "We're all in this together," and then gave millionaires a huge tax cut. A £3 billion tax cut for the top 1% of earners, while most people are paying hundreds of pounds more each year in VAT. They said they'd balance the books by 2015, but borrowing set to be £75 billion next year, the cost they choked off the recovery back in 2010 with that reckless first budget. They said they'd back the next generation, but apprenticeships for young people are falling. There are still 800,000 young people out of work, including 15,000 here in the eastern region. And they said they'd rebalance the economy, but house building is at its lowest level since the 1920s. Net lending to business is down. Business investment is lagging behind our competitors. Export growth since 2010 is 6 out of 7 countries in the G7. So it's no wonder that when David Cameron and George Osborne say everything's going well and the economy is fixed, people here in Bedford and across the country say it may be working for you, but it's not working for me, for my family, for our community. As the former Conservative Chancellor Kenneth Clarke admitted last month, most people are not feeling any sense of recovery at all. The fact is, living standards are still being squeezed now, and people are worried and insecure about the future. The old Harold Macmillan line, "You've never had it so good," may have resonated in post-war Britain when he used that line for the first time here in Bedford in 1957. But nearly 60 years on, every time in Prime Minister's questions, David Cameron tries to tell people, "You've never had it so good." I think most people just think it's completely out of touch with what's going on in real people's lives. Here in Bedford in 2014, what Patrick tells me people are saying to him on the doorstep is exactly what people are saying to me in Morley and Outwood, 150 miles further north. Why are we not sharing in economic recovery? Where will the good jobs come from in the future? Will my children have the same chance as my generation? How will Britain earn its way in a rapidly changing world? These are the questions people are asking here and across the country. And the fact is, we know we're not going to get a balanced, investment-led recovery that benefits all working people with more of the same from the Conservatives. A race to the bottom on wages, Treasury opposition to a proper industrial strategy, flirting with exit from the European Union, hoping tax cuts at the top will trickle down to everyone else. Working people can't afford 5 more years of the same Tory economics. Already today, even before living standards have stopped falling, the government's failure to get more homes built means there is now a real risk that interest rates will have to rise prematurely to rein in an unbalanced housing market. And we know what the next 5 years will bring. George Osborne, once again a Tory Chancellor who, having abolished the regional development agencies, backed the Beecroft Plan, trying to persuade workers to trade their rights for chairs, is blocking the Heseltine Plan to devolve real power and resources to business and local government to support local skills and innovation, the kind of ideas that Lord Andrew Adonis has put forward for Labour. David Cameron, once again, a Tory leader, caving into his Eurosceptic backbenchers, putting party interest before the national interest by flirting with withdrawal from the EU, which we know would be a disaster for British jobs and business investment. But we know the Tories' real economic plan is to cut taxes at the top and hope the wealth will trickle down. Having already cut taxes for millionaires in this Parliament, they're champing at the bit to do it again, to cut the top rate of tax for people earning over 150,000 down to 40p in the pound. Another £3 billion tax cut for the richest 1% in our country. We know George Osborne wanted to cut the top rate to 40p in his omni-shambles budget 2 years ago. David Cameron won't rule it out when Ed Miliband asks him time and time again in Parliament. And we know that Boris Johnson and the right of the Conservative Party are demanding that top rate tax cut immediately. Cabinet colleague, the Minister for Government Policy, Oliver Letwin, has let it slip again. He's advocating the old right-wing idea of a flat tax if the Tories win the election. That means lower taxes for the richest and higher taxes for everyone else. The Institute of Fiscal Studies have calculated that a flat tax to be revenue neutral would have to be set at 31%. That would mean a tax cut to 31% at the top, but a huge increase in tax for 24 million working people on middle and lower incomes currently paying the basic rate at 20p. 10 years ago, George Osborne said he found this idea very exciting. No wonder then, behind closed doors, Conservatives are talking about reviving this idea again. We know that is the real Tory agenda for a second term. Standing up for a few while everyone else pays the price and gets left behind. That is what is at stake in the general election in 2015. And that's why we've got to rise to the challenges Patrick said. We know the next Labour government will face great challenges. The failure of the Conservatives to deliver raising living standards for the many, not just a few. Their failure to deliver a balanced budget, their failure to balance the books, means the next Labour government will face a daunting task. But we are determined to rise to the challenge with long-term changes to create an economy that works for all working people and not just a few. So Labour's economic plan will make Britain better off and fairer for the future. It's a radical and credible plan based on big reform, not big spending. First, we'll support working people to make work pay and tackle insecurity in the labour market. That means expanding childcare, free childcare for working parents, freezing energy bills, introducing a lower 10p starting rate of tax, increasing the minimum wage, ending the exploitative use of zero-hours contracts and giving tax breaks to firms that pay the living wage. Second, we need to create more good jobs and ensure young people have got the skills they need to succeed. So we'll boost apprenticeships, transform vocational education, ensure there is a paid starter job for every young person out of work for over a year, a compulsory jobs guarantee funded by a tax on bank bonuses that will help 2,500 young people here in the Eastern region. Third, we need to build a stronger and more balanced economy. So a vital part of our plan is to build at least 200,000 new homes a year, affordable homes, in the right places. Devolving more power and funding to cities and county regions and investing for the long term with an independent National Infrastructure Commission to end dither and delay on the big decisions we need to make for the future. Fourth, we need to promote long-term reform and competition in markets like energy and banking so they work better for consumers and businesses and support long-term investment. That's why we welcome the Bank of England's announcement today that bank bonuses will now be clawed back if things go wrong, alongside tougher regulation and strengthened criminal penalties. And because Ed Balls and I have repeatedly called for an inquiry into bank competition, it's welcome that the Competition and Markets Authority will start work later this year. As we said in January, in the next Parliament, we want at least 2 new challenger banks and a market share test to ensure the market stays competitive for the long term. Fifth, we'll back British business by cutting business rates, but we'll maintain our position with the most competitive corporation tax rate in the G7. We'll establish a proper British investment bank and argue for Britain to stay in a reformed European Union, all vital to unlock long-term investment. And finally, I'm clear the next Labour government will complete the task where this government has failed and balance the books in the next Parliament. As our National Policy Forum voted for last weekend, Labour will balance the books and get the national debt falling as soon as possible in the next Parliament. We'll legislate for tough fiscal rules in the first year after the election, and they'll be independently monitored by the Office for Budget Responsibility. But we'll do so in a fairer way, including by reversing David Cameron's top-rate tax cut for millionaires back to 50p as we get the deficit down. We'll tackle tax avoidance and we'll cut the winter fuel allowance for the richest pensioners. And as I said, to help restore trust in politics and improve the quality of debate in advance of the next election, we want the Office of Budget Responsibility to be allowed to independently audit the tax and spending commitments in our election manifesto and those of the other main political parties. I have to say, the fact that George Osborne is so desperate to block this move and prevent independent audit just shows all he wants to do is carry on peddling untruths and smears about Labour's plans, but I think also he's running scared from proper scrutiny of his own manifesto, which should be subject to that independent scrutiny as well. So that's the choice, the stark choice we face next year. A choice between a Labour plan to to make people better off and Britain fairer for the future, with rising living standards for the many, not just a few, or more of the same from the Tories. More good jobs with Labour, or a race to the bottom on wages under the Tories. The books balance fairly with Labour, or ordinary families hit first under the Tories. Reforms to make Europe work better with Labour, or sleepwalking to the EU exit door and putting millions of jobs at risk under the Tories. Tax cuts for millions on middle and lower incomes with Labour, or another tax cut for millionaires under the Tories. I think this is the most important general election in a generation. That's why, for millions of people struggling to make ends meet, for hundreds of thousands of young people out of work, for businesses large and small who know Britain's future is in Europe, we can't risk another Tory government, so let's go out there and win it. Thank you for coming today.